Transforming self-pretense. Transforming self-pretense. What do we mean by self-pretense? Self-pretense is, well, it's what it sounds like. It's when we believe that we are something, or we have achieved something, and in actual fact we haven't. We've just made it up. We've sort of, we've pretended inside ourselves that we are something. We are someone. We are confident. I am powerful. I am, awakened. I am whatever it is. And self-pretense is like we've kidded ourselves. We've fabricated a delusion of some form, and then we believe that delusion, and our behavior manifests that delusion. And it can be very obvious in some cases, or it can be, in cases where someone thinks they're really powerful, but it's quite clear when you look at them that they really are deeply insecure. Or it can be very subtle. It can be really subtle patterns where someone has a really powerful intellect and they look really impressive, or they seem like they're a very self-aware, awakened person, but then actually underneath it, as you get to know them and you see their behavior, you hear, especially behind closed doors, you get to see, wow, there's more going on here that this person hasn't revealed, so obviously or up front. So, and we see it around us, but also seeing it inside oneself is a real, it's a challenge, it's an incredible challenge. What a work, what a humility we need to be able to see through our own falseness, our own inauthenticity. There are places, blind spots that we have. And that's what I want to explore here today, transforming those patterns of self-pretense where we kind of kid ourselves. Let's take some examples, like because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, particularly in the field that I'm in, which is spirituality. And one of the great misconceptions is that to be awake is to be spiritual. And those two are connected, but it's a complete misconception. So I want you to really consider this and contemplate this, that there's a kind of false awakening that many can have, a sense that one has had a spiritual experience, and that through that spiritual experience, I've somehow awakened into a heightened state of consciousness, and then I live in that consciousness. And we've kind of been given this idea from mystics for eons, and particularly from mystics from the Eastern traditions, that there's this sudden thing that happens, and then out of that sudden thing, we suddenly change and we're forever perfect, right? So what I want to put out there as the possibility is that spirituality and awakening are not necessarily connected. You can be very unspiritual and you can be completely awake. You can actually be an atheist and you can be completely awake. So what do we mean by awake? And how do we come through this self-pretense into this awakeness? It's about self-awareness. That's really it. That's the word I'd use, self-awareness. Self-awareness is something that grows organically through living an authentic life. If you can live authentically, if you can be honest with yourself, then self-awareness is something that naturally grows. You can't, it's like you can't fake self-awareness. You can, you can fake anything, right? But the real self-awareness chips away at our identity, our false identities, so that it reveals everything as false. So every ego we take, every shell that our ego, our kind of identity assumes, whether it's I am the great awakened being or the Buddha or whatever it is, I've achieved this, I'm this. Self-awareness cuts through that. It doesn't take away from the inherent kind of power of different states that we've attained, but it just shows all states as stages along a long path of change and awakening that's growing and growing and growing. So I have this friend who lives in my village, right? He's a man in his 70s, And when I think of him, I think of, wow, I realized over the years, wow, this man is really one of the most awake people I know. But if you asked him, do you believe in God? He'd go, no, I think when you die, you die. But I tell you, if you watch this man and you watch his behavior over a period of time, it's incredible. Not only is he cheerful in his nature, he has this sort of cheer, but it's not faked. He can't fake that. But he lives a life of service, and simplicity and ordinariness. And he doesn't ask much of life, but he really accepts himself at such a deep level. And it's a delight to be around because of that, because there's no pretense, none at all. And we all know people like this. We know people have no pretense. And they don't even have because some people have the pretense of, I'm being authentic. I'm an authentic person. And then I can be authentically angry, and I can be authentically shout at you, or I can be, I'm not perfect. I mean, authentically imperfect. But actually, true self-awareness is sort of a sense of delight. It's a delight in life. That's its patina. That's its flavor. Because there's nothing to hold on to. So it doesn't take anything seriously. I mean, it can have opinions and it can be serious, but it doesn't take life seriously because there's nothing that can stick to self-awareness. On the other side of the spectrum, you can have someone who's incredibly spiritual. I mean, I'm really spiritual, right? Because I'm really interested in spirituality and spiritual things and higher consciousness and all of that. But you could be completely not awake. You can be completely in a veil of self-pretense of I'm awake, and the spiritual things I do and the spiritual techniques and all this discipline and all this sadhana and all the prayer or the meditation and all of that, or the lineage and my master and all of that is all part of my journey of awakening. But the problem with awakening is that when someone actually does find it naturally on their own, just through following their own authentic nature, however it is, they then don't know how to advise someone else necessarily, because the way they found it was completely unique to them. So if you try and imitate their path or their way, they may have meditated for 20 years and then suddenly there it was. But that's not your path. How would you know that? You might try it for a bit and you could force yourself into that role because it worked for that person and it worked for that person. But how do you know it's going to work for you? You don't. All you have is your instincts. And instinct's really important as a part of self-awareness, as a part of moving through self-pretense, getting rid of the layers of subtle ego that we hold. Think about freedom, because this is where we're heading. This is what freedom is. Freedom is the freedom to believe anything, to think anything, to feel anything, to give yourself permission to be free. To give yourself permission to be human, to give yourself permission to feel desire, to give yourself permission to think anything, and to make space. This is what contemplation is. And this talk is based on one of the gene keys, gene key number 20, which is called contemplation. Contemplation is where you make space within your soul for any state, any feeling, any thought. It's all welcome, without any attachment. It comes, it goes. Nothing is excluded. It's the ultimate inclusion. Every part of you is included, can be included in that space of contemplation. And that's what opens up the vista of true freedom. And false awakening or false pretense is when we kind of edit. We think this isn't, I don't want that behavior. I'm going to edit that behavior out and make it look like I'm perfect. And that can, that can be very subtle, those subtle levels that we can play that game. So think about that and think about, even evil. the concept of evil. It's like we contain the seed of evil, the seed of good. It's all part of the whole of our being. So this self-pretense, it has layers and levels of nuance, and we have to be really, alert, to our own patterns, to look within. That's why contemplation allows us to see these patterns. One of our primary desires is to escape the suffering. So we try all kinds of ways of escaping suffering. And one day we might realize, wow, I can't escape it. And when we realize I can't escape it, that's when we feel the freedom. It's like thinking you can get to this state of awakening, but nothing can be left out. There is no impurity. We often get that state where we think, I've got to purify in some way. I've got to get rid of these impurities. And you can't get rid of them all. So we have to have no anxiety in us about whether we're awake or whether we're not awake. There's just this inherent freedom. And with that freedom comes cheerfulness, and a wish to serve others, a wish to share one's delight, one's simplicity, one's self-assurance. And that's the beauty, is that you don't even, my friend, John, his name is, he doesn't even know he's self-aware. That's the beauty. It's like self-awareness just is. He doesn't need to know he's self-aware. He is self-aware. It just grows there. He can't pretend it. I can't pretend it. No one can pretend it. And this is the beauty of full embodiment, being in one of these bodies, to really fill your body, to really be in the world, in the steps of your own self, of following your instincts, not knowing where it's going to lead you, and the utter beauty of the incarnation of your life. There's deep harmony in being here. You would never wish to leave if you really understand the perfection of being here, the simplicity of just the beauty of like finding your way in your world, in your life, in your locale, in your community, in your friends, finding the beauty of the simplicity, of life. This is the perfection. The perfection is so ordinary, and the perfecting of the body, of being in the body. There's a sort of, within this form, at the deepest level, there's a sense of flight. The flight in the form, I call it. It's like a sense of it's the freedom of being in a form. It's an irony that once you really, really surrender to being here, being in the body, love its impurities, love its instincts, love all of it, you kind of elevate your incarnation to its freest, most exalted state. And this is the state that everyone's looking for, and it's a natural state. It's the most natural state. It's right here, right now. It isn't in some perfect future, We're all on trajectories towards it. But I wanted you to understand that it doesn't necessarily include spirituality. It may or it may not. Spirituality is just a hobby in a way to the soul. It's not essential in order to attain this fullness of being. So that's what we mean by transforming self-pretense, pulling off the layers and giving yourself permission to be free and to let go of those those very difficult goals we sometimes set ourselves, that this has to be hard, this has to be challenging, this has to be, there's a long, long journey to this awakened state. And actually it is right here, but you can't pretend that either. You can't go, I've suddenly let go of everything, I'm here. That can't be a pretense. So that's what I mean by there being subtler and subtler layers. You have to come to these things. So you maybe even have to go down these spiritual routes to find the end of them, and then maybe they take you into a transcendent state, or maybe they drop away and you come back. Who knows what our individual journeys are? We don't know. We only know each step we make. So give yourself permission to be freer and freer, and fall in love with the body, with the incarnation, if you can. The preciousness, the rarity of this body, of this form, this clay that we find ourselves in. And just accept everything you can about yourself. And that's when you begin to let go of this self-pretenses and the false awakening. And then you begin to find the real thing, and how beautiful and how ordinary it is, and how wonderful it is, and how cheerful it will make you feel. So much love to each and every one of you. I hope this is helpful as a contemplation. Create that space of contemplation, and then allow yourself to include all aspects of your being inside yourself. Blessings.